Have you ever driven through the desert at night? The only sound the hum of your engine and the occasional rustle of wind? It's a kind of silence you don't find anywhere else. Vast, endless, almost peaceful. That was the plan for me too. A quiet drive through the Nevada wilderness. But when my headlights cut through the darkness, I saw something in the distance that shouldn't have been there. A figure. Tall. Thin. Almost too still. I should have turned around, gone back to the safety of the road. But something about it pulled me in, like a whisper in the wind. What happened next shattered everything I thought I knew about the desert and the world. Was it a trick of the light? Or had I stumbled onto something far darker than I could have ever imagined? Keep watching, because what I found out there might just change everything. But before we start, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you'll never miss a spine-tingling episode. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to like, comment, and share the video. And if you want even more, stay connected with us on our social media platforms for more creepy content. Thank you all for being part of this journey with me. And now let's dive into the darkness together. It was the kind of night that could only exist in the middle of nowhere. Desolate and silent, a vast stretch of desert with nothing but sand and stars. The sky was an endless blanket of deep, endless black, punctuated by a million twinkling lights. And the full moon hung low, casting a surreal, bluish glow over everything. It felt like a dream, a moment suspended in time. But it was real. Too real. I had been driving through the Nevada desert for hours, winding down lonely highways, my headlights the only source of illumination in the pitch-black nothingness. The air in the truck was dry, thin, and hot, despite the chill of the night settling in. My mind was hazy, lost in the monotony of the road, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Something that didn't belong. I'd passed by the familiar sign of Area 51 a little while ago. Always a strange feeling, seeing that legend on the side of the road. But this was different. My heart thudded in my chest as my truck's headlights cut through the night and illuminated a strange figure standing in the middle of the desert, just off the road. At first, I thought it was a mirage. The heat waves rising from the sand were notorious for distorting shapes. But this wasn't right. It was too still, too unnatural. I slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt, kicking up a cloud of red dust. I was in the middle of nowhere, miles from any town, but I couldn't just drive away. Curiosity, or maybe something more primal, tugged at me. Something inside me told me I had to go closer, get a better look. I stepped out of the truck, my boots crunching on the dry sand. The air was cool against my skin, but the atmosphere felt heavy, almost suffocating. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I approached the figure, the full moon casting everything in an eerie light. It was tall, taller than any person I'd ever seen. Its limbs were long and thin, almost impossibly so. Its head, large and bulbous, seemed too big for its frail body. The skin, if that's what it was, appeared slick, pale, almost glowing in the moonlight. But what struck me the most were its eyes, huge, black, and deep, like two infinite voids, drawing me in. I stopped, frozen. I wanted to run, to turn and flee back to the truck, but my legs refused to move. I just stood there, staring into its dark eyes. There was something unsettlingly peaceful about it. It wasn't aggressive or menacing, but there was a knowingness in its gaze, something ancient and all-knowing. Then, it did something that made my blood run cold. The alien, if it even was an alien, raised one of its long, spindly arms, its fingers outstretched toward me. I could hear my breath, shallow and frantic in the quiet of the desert, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. Slowly, like it was trying to bridge a gap between us, I felt my own hand rise of its own accord. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to be near it. But I couldn't stop myself. My body felt like it was being drawn into its pull. As if on cue, a bright beam of light suddenly pierced the air from above, blindingly bright, casting everything into a harsh light. I shielded my eyes, but the beam remained steady, focused on the ground just to the right of the figure. My mind raced. Was I dreaming? Was this really happening? I turned my head, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Floating above the sand, a flying saucer hovered, its surface gleaming like polished metal. It was large, circular, with strange markings etched into its surface. The craft emitted a faint hum, almost imperceptible over the sound of my pounding heartbeat. The air seemed to crackle with energy, and for a moment, the world felt like it was vibrating, like time itself was bending. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine as I glanced to my left. There, in the distance, stood a sign, bathed in the same bluish light from the moon and the beam. It read, Area 51, in bold, stark white letters on a blood-red background, just like the ones I'd seen on my way out here. But this was different. The sign looked old, worn, and faded, like it had been there far longer than it should have. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the sign, but when I looked back to the alien, I saw that it hadn't moved. It was still staring at me, its long fingers still outstretched, inviting or perhaps demanding something. I could feel the pressure in the air intensifying, like something massive was about to unfold, but I didn't know what. Warning. Restricted area. A second sign illuminated by the saucer's light read, flashing above the creature's figure, and a wave of dread washed over me. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just on some forgotten stretch of desert anymore. This was it. Area 51. The place where legends were born. The place where secrets were buried. The words restricted area flashed like a warning in my brain, but I couldn't stop staring at the alien. Its presence was both soothing and terrifying. It felt like I was looking into something that existed outside of time and space, something that had been waiting for me. A strange noise cut through the stillness, a low hum. It wasn't coming from the saucer, but from the air itself, vibrating through my bones. The alien didn't move, but I could feel it now, an almost tangible presence pushing against me, compelling me to step forward. I didn't want to, but my body unwillingly moved. My hand trembled as it reached out, and I couldn't understand what was happening. The alien's fingers twitched, and I could swear it was smiling, but no expression crossed its face. Just before our fingers could touch, the world seemed to blur. The ground shifted beneath me, the sky warped, the stars twisting in their orbits, like something was distorting the very fabric of reality. And then, everything went black. When I awoke, I was alone. The saucer was gone. The alien was gone. The signs were gone. I was standing in the middle of the desert, the moon high above me, casting the same bluish light over the land. There was no sign of the strange encounter I'd just had, like it had never happened. I stumbled back to my truck, my legs weak, my mind a mess of confusion and fear. But there was one thing I knew for certain. Whatever happened out there, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't some figment of my imagination. It was real, too real, and I would never be able to forget the look in those eyes. As I drove away, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, like the night had marked me, changed something deep inside. I never stopped thinking about that moment. The alien, the flying saucer, the signs. Something had happened out there in the desert, something I could never explain, and I knew I wasn't the only one. I wasn't the first to see them. I wouldn't be the last. I found myself caught in a battle against a rare and aggressive form of blood cancer. The doctors gave me little hope, and as the days passed, the grim reality of my condition became more apparent. With the clock ticking and no certain path ahead, I made the heart-wrenching decision to forgo further treatment and prepare for whatever came next. During the weeks leading up to Christmas that year, our isolated farm on the southern reaches of New Zealand's South Island became the site of an unsettling phenomenon. Strange lights flickered and danced across the darkening skies. At first, we thought they might be weather balloons, but their erratic movement, twisting in unpredictable patterns, suggested something far stranger. The farm was in a quiet corner of the world, miles away from the noise of cities, and these strange lights became our secret. We told no one, unsure of how to explain it. One night, just a week before Christmas, as we sat down for dinner, I noticed something odd outside the window. A light hovered low over the paddock, then slowly descended toward the ground. When it landed, I saw a shape that made my blood run cold, a disc gleaming in the moonlight. Instinctively, I reached for my hunting rifle, my hands trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. But before I could even grip the rifle, they appeared. Creatures from a nightmare, their insect-like forms crawling through the dim light of our home. They were inside the lounge before we could comprehend what was happening. We never saw how they entered, as though they had simply materialized. The air felt thick, suffocating. Their eyes seemed to see through us, locking onto our souls with an unspoken malice. My wife Mary stood behind me, holding our daughter Leah protectively. Our daughter, however, seemed strangely fascinated by the creatures, while Mary and I were frozen with fear. We could not move, not even to lift my weapon. My limbs betrayed me as a cold, paralyzing dread gripped us, leaving me powerless in the face of this unknown terror. I have no words to describe what it felt like to be trapped in that moment. Imagine, if you can, being paralyzed with fear and uncertainty, facing creatures that could bend reality around them. I couldn't protect my family, and the feeling of failure cut through me like a blade. As quickly as they appeared, the creatures vanished, leaving us shaken and alone, their brief visitation marking us with the weight of an inexplicable terror. We didn't speak of it, deciding to move past it, especially with Christmas coming. Our extended family was on their way to celebrate with us, and despite my deteriorating health, I wanted to make the most of what might be my last Christmas. The day arrived, and Mary, always strong, had prepared a feast. Roasting turkey and freshly baked pies filled the house with the warmth of family tradition. Despite the joy of the day, the shadow of my illness loomed over me. But the memory of those strange beings lingered, unspoken, as we moved forward with our holiday. The evening grew darker, and we settled in for a quiet night. But then, something else broke the calm. I woke suddenly, my heart racing as unease swept over me. I crept through the house, only to catch sight of one of the creatures slipping silently into Leah's room. The terror inside me surged, and I hurried to her side, only to find her bed empty. They had taken her. Desperation gripped me as I scrambled for the phone, but the lines were dead. The hum of electricity had vanished, replaced by an eerie silence. In a panic, I turned to Mary, who stood frozen beside me. We were caught in a waking nightmare. The house seemed to pulse with an unearthly energy as we searched for answers. Then, just as suddenly as the terror had begun, we both collapsed. I remember the dizziness, the nausea, as we both lost consciousness. When I awoke, the morning light seemed surreal, and I found Mary beside me, safe, with Leah in the next room. But the horror wasn't over. As the days wore on, the memories of that night began to blur, leaving behind only confusion and a gnawing sense of loss. The years passed, and life carried on, but the question of what had truly happened to Leah remained. She never showed signs of trauma, never mentioned any unusual experiences, and the doctors found nothing to explain it. Our memories of the events were fragmented and odd, suggesting that only I had been taken by whatever those beings were. In February, I went for a routine checkup with my oncologist. Expecting the worst, I steeled myself for the confirmation that my cancer had not abated. But when the doctor entered, his expression was baffling. He told me something I would never forget. The cancer was gone. I had no explanation for it. It was a miracle. Though this gave me hope, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. In the weeks that followed, I was plagued with nightmares of those creatures. Alien faces, strange lights, and invasive procedures. My dreams grew more vivid and painful. But despite the horrors I had endured, a part of me couldn't ignore the strange gift they had left behind, a second chance at life. As for Leah, she grew up unscathed, blissfully unaware of the terror that had once haunted us. The memories of that night remained locked away in my mind, and after all these years, I still don't know what those beings truly wanted or why they spared me. The questions remain unanswered, but I no longer dwell on them. Now, I treasure every moment with my family, knowing how fleeting life can be. And as the years go by, I look back on that Christmas as the most precious one I had, a time when love and family triumphed over fear, even in the face of the unknown. I'm still hesitant. I've always been someone who values reason and logic over anything else. The idea of the supernatural, aliens, or anything remotely beyond the confines of our understanding was something I dismissed entirely. I've never been one for fantastical movies or fiction novels. I prefer the tangible, the real, the things that can be explained away by science and logic. It wasn't that I was cynical, but I had always thought there was simply no room for things that didn't have a rational explanation. That's why I'm still torn about what happened to me. On one hand, my mind screams that there has to be an explanation. On the other, there's a part of me that simply can't dismiss what I experienced, no matter how illogical it may sound. I've been trying to convince myself it was just a dream or a strange side effect of stress, but deep down, something tells me it wasn't. What I experienced was far too real to chalk up to mere imagination. It all began about a week ago, and I've spent the last few days trying to wrap my head around it. I needed time to process everything before I could even think about writing it down, but here I am. I've debated whether I should share it, but ultimately, I think it's important to get this out there, whether anyone believes me or not. I was driving home from work one night, like I've done countless times before. It was around 11:45 p.m., the time of night when the roads are mostly empty and everything feels quiet and still. It's at that time when you can let your mind wander a bit, and that's what I was doing. I wasn't in a hurry, just following my usual routine, completely absorbed in my thoughts. I approached a red light, as I've done 1,000 times before. I stopped, waited, and then the light turned green. I continued on my way. But what happened next was something I couldn't explain. A few moments later, I found myself at the exact same intersection, facing the same red light again. I had just passed it. The same street, the same turn, the same moment in time. It was as though I had looped back in time, but I didn't really think much of it at first. I just chalked it up to me being tired, or not paying close attention. Maybe I had just made a mistake, I thought. It wasn't until I got home and thought about it more that I realized something was off. It felt like time had been distorted, but I didn't know what to make of it. It didn't feel like anything otherworldly, but I also couldn't dismiss the feeling. At the time, it was just one of those strange, unexplainable things that happens once in a while. It didn't seem like something I needed to worry about, so I decided to let it go. That night, I went to bed, and everything seemed normal. I woke up around 3 a.m., parched and needing a drink of water. Afterward, I crawled back into bed, exhausted, and I must have fallen asleep immediately. But what happened next felt like something straight out of a nightmare. When I woke up again, I wasn't in my bed. I wasn't even in my room. I was in some kind of small, sterile space. It wasn't like anything I had ever experienced before. My body was unnaturally stiff, and when I tried to move, I realized my arms were held out at a 90-degree angle, completely immobilized. They were bound by something I could only describe as clear plastic. It wasn't hard or solid, more like a gel, but it was definitely holding me in place. I couldn't move. My head felt heavy, and I was laying on something cold, padded, almost like I was on a bed made of gel. I don't know how long I had been lying there, but it felt like an eternity. I was conscious, fully aware of my surroundings, but everything felt off. The room I was in was small, almost claustrophobic. The air was cold and sterile. I felt oddly sedated, like I had just come out of some sort of procedure. My thoughts weren't completely clear, and the world around me felt hazy, as if I were suspended in some sort of suspended animation. But the strangest thing was, I didn't feel like I was dreaming. It didn't have that surreal, floating quality that dreams do. No, this felt far too real. I lay there in confusion, trying to process what was happening. The silence was suffocating. My mind raced, and that's when I heard it. A noise. At first, it sounded like a deep mechanical hum, like a door opening in an old video game, something you'd hear in the early 90s games like Doom. It was deep, resonating, with a low, almost sinister pitch to it. And then I saw them. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. There were creatures, aliens I suppose, though I never believed in them before. They moved so quickly, too quickly for me to follow with my eyes. Their presence was so overwhelming that I felt it more than I saw it. There was no sound when they walked, no footsteps, no nothing, but they were there. I could feel them. One of them stepped closer, looking directly at me. It was like something out of a nightmare. Its eyes were enormous, almost alien, and its skin was so pale, so smooth. The details were disturbing, like seeing a creature from one of those poorly made fake alien images. But it wasn't fake. It was real, standing inches from me. Its gaze was intense, and I felt it all the way to my bones. There was something deeply unsettling about the way it moved. Almost unnatural. It didn't blink, didn't even seem to have eyelids. It was as though it was aware of every single movement I made. But there was more. I could feel another one, another presence behind me, closer to my body, touching me. It wasn't like any alien I had seen in the movies. This being moved with precision, with intent, like it knew exactly what it was doing. Every muscle in its face was alive and shifting, and it was all too much to process. They didn't speak, but their presence alone was enough to send a chill down my spine. The alien above me, staring down at me with those enormous eyes, didn't speak either. It simply watched. Then, in a swift motion, everything blurred, and I lost consciousness once again. The next time I woke up, it was far later than I should have. I typically wake up around 7:30 a.m., but this time I awoke at noon, something that had never happened to me before. My body felt heavy, like I had been in a deep sleep. It was as if I had missed hours, and I couldn't explain where they had gone. I've spent the days since trying to make sense of it all. What happened to me? Was it a dream? A hallucination? Or something far stranger? I don't know. But it felt too real to dismiss. I can't say for sure what I experienced, but I can't help but feel that it wasn't a coincidence. That's my story. Maybe you'll believe it, maybe you won't. But I can't shake the feeling that something unexplainable happened to me, and I don't know what to make of it. I just wanted to share it with you. Maybe someone out there has had a similar experience, or can offer some insight. If you've made it to the end of this video, let me know in the comments which story creeped you out the most. And if you could survive only one of these stories, which one would it be? Also, drop "I made it" and mention our channel in the comments below. I want to know who my loyal followers are so I can give you a shout out in our next videos. And lastly, if you've experienced a terrifying encounter or have a horror story to share, send it to us on Reddit. And if you want to support the channel and help us create even more spine-chilling content, check out our Patreon or Ko-Fi. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to like and share the video, and now, stay tuned for our next horror episode.